I'm Scott Allen Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. And today I have a question that was sent in by video, which I absolutely love when you guys do this. So thank you so much to Tim, who sent in a question about working as a pilot here in Nicaragua. This is an interesting one because we never really talked about this before. So we're going to jump in and answer his questions as best as we can right after the bump. All right, before we actually jump into today's video, I just want to say that Tim sent in a video of himself so he can be on the show, and you can do this too. If you get into today's episode notes and scroll down, there's some information on how you can make a video of yourself and send it in. It's a great way to ask a question. Of course, you can ask questions in the show, in the comments, and say hello and all that. And remember to give us a thumbs up while you're doing it. But it's even better when you make a video of yourself and send it in. One, it basically guarantees I'm going to put you on the show, and two, it means I'm paying attention and definitely see it and don't forget about it. And three, it's just way more fun when we get the community to collaborate. So thanks so much for Tim for sending this in. And without further ado, we're going to go right on to his question.
Hey, good evening, Scott. My name is Tim from Lebanon, Pennsylvania, right outside of Hershey. Not super far in the scheme of things where it says you grew up. But at any rate, hey, I've been watching some of your videos. I've been tossing around the idea in just a few years of possibly moving to Central America, and because of your videos and a few others, I'm really leaning towards Nicaragua. Obviously, I'm going to be stopping down, taking a couple trips, checking a couple different places out, and I really enjoyed your videos. I've been watching a lot of them, and then I decided to just start at your most recent one and work my way back. So I'm literally just watching every single one. I think you give valid opinions from someone that has been there. I think it's knowledgeable. I've watched a couple other ones, and you watch a couple and you're not really sure. Yours seem all pretty spot on. So I did have a question. So here in the Pennsylvania, I am a full-time flight attendant. My company does not go international. I'm home every night. I am also a mechanic, and I do that part-time, full-time flight attendant, but I'm also just finishing up my commercial phase of pilot training. So here in the U.S., this is kind of a specific question. It could be. It has to do with work, which I've seen a few of your videos on. But here in the U.S., our pilot requirements are very, very high. Higher than the rest of the world, where we need 1,500 hours of experience before we can even maybe looked at or get about getting picked up by a regional. We can do some other options, maybe some charter private stuff with less time than that. So if you're just starting out and you're on a reserve schedule, you got to be there at, a few hours notice. So living out of the country obviously isn't something that is doable at that point. Now, if I remain a flight attendant, by the time I'm moving there, my seniority would be high enough for it to pick my schedule and obviously just fly in, work my trips, fly home. So that wouldn't be an issue. However, what I was wondering is the digital nomad life seems to be at the forefront along with retirees. What is your experience or take on individuals coming and actually working a skilled trade? I know you had touched on the point that, that the government is not fond of others coming in doing work that a citizen should be doing. But what is that the same with skilled trades? Would it be possible to work for, your domestic air carrier? I think it's La Casenta, or even one, say in Costa Rica, domestic carrier, or Panama. Would it be possible for a skilled trade to work in the country? And number one, and number two, how would that look like? Would that be a citizen requirement? Do you know anybody that has done that? Is this move or life in this country feasible for somebody other than a retiree or a digital nomad? Any help would be appreciated. I'm sure there's a lot of folks like that. Again, we're talking definite skilled trade, not, say restaurant work, hospitality work or something like that. Any help, I'd appreciate it. Again, thanks for all your time and input. I'm going to keep going down your list and, hopefully run into you one of these times. But I'm definitely coming to check out the country. This is just very, very, very much preliminary. Trying to do lots and lots of research, not be the people that you are always talking about in your videos who are making piss poor decisions and not getting the facts. So I appreciate it, and I will talk to you later. Hey, good evening, Scott. So this is Tim again, and I took today to a little bit of time to skim through some of your older videos, and I did answer a few of my questions that I just asked you yesterday about working. So I do understand that. I guess and this is really specialized and specific, I guess my real question would be, and I didn't, maybe I would just have to go direct and ask. I have no idea, but I would be looking as a pilot, obviously. Could somebody from outside the country work for the La Crescenta airline? Or is that still no exceptions? That I'm not looking to do skilled trade in Nicaragua as far as mechanic work or anything. It would strictly be flight based as a pilot. Or flight attendant, but pilot is where I would be at. So that's really specific. I don't know if you know anybody in the industry there that could help me out or maybe answer that question. It seems airlines, even international ones in other countries, they always have such a mix of their pilots. It seems in the industry I see them, living in one country, working in another, commuting. It's kind of like a norm, but I don't know if that's the norm with that particular airline. That would be a pretty specific question. That's kind of where I'm at, not looking for other types of work. So if this kind of narrows it down a little bit better, or at least you recognize I looked back through and kind of answered some of those questions there, but still have this one, let me know if you can come up with anything. Greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Tim, thanks so much for sending that in. I want to start with a little bit of background information because everyone's going to be interested in this, I think, or just it's good information to have. So Tim is looking at being a pilot or possibly a flight attendant here in Nicaragua. Well, the first thing is I have not flown actually inside Nicaragua, but there's only one airline that operates here currently. There are a few places where you can fly a crop duster, so the possibility of owning your own plane and being a pilot, you want to fly somewhere, does exist. We do have some locals who do that. I live right by Leon Airport, and people do fly in and out of there, or I should say a person flies in and out of there with a tiny little crop duster that seats two people. We see it buzz the beach from time to time, but that's really not going to qualify as any kind of job or anything. But if you're talking about actual airlines, we have one here in the country, that is Costeña, which flies between Managua and Bluefields and the Corn Islands. It is a relatively small loop, and it is serviced just a couple times a day. To the best of my knowledge, there are no flight attendants on this airline. That does not mean that there's not. I may not be knowledgeable enough, but my understanding is that the planes are so small that they're not big enough to have a flight attendant. If they are big enough, then they have one flight attendant that probably services the entire route. I fly on a much larger airlines to Belize from Guatemala, and they do have a flight attendant there. It is still a pretty small plane, but these are much smaller. These are tiny little planes. That said, I believe there's probably only maybe 2 pilots in the system. Someone's going to be like, no, I've talked to them. They've got 20 pilots. And I'll be like, wow, really? But there's basically just a couple planes and doing a very tight loop with very, very tiny planes. So the potential for like getting into a pool of pilots or anything, that's where a big physical challenge is going to exist. Let's imagine that Tim is Nicaraguan, got his license here in Nicaragua, and has just always been a pilot, and is from here with no limitations. I think it would still be outrageously difficult to get in because there's just so little flight patterns going on. The flights are entirely inside the country and just a few a day and relatively short flights. So it's a tiny airlines, right? So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the Costa Rican Airlines that flies between Costa Rica and here. It's also a tiny airlines, but it's at least larger, where you are flying internationally and go to more than one airport, right? It's not just one loop, it's a couple of things. Still absolutely tiny, but the distances are farther and the number of destinations is farther and the amount of traffic is much higher. So that's Costa Rica, but here our airlines, which we used to have more of, we used to have a bigger airlines, went more places. Nicaragua was just not a place that people fly out of really. So we're talking about a tiny airlines with tiny planes and just a few of them with just a few runs inside the country. So that sets the stage for what he's asking about so that we can now talk about what his opportunities could potentially be. So as Tim has guessed, being a pilot could potentially be one of those fields that's super specialized, not on a global scale so much, but here in Central America, there are so few pilots that it would potentially qualify as a highly skilled, exclusive career path. So if he was to, and I would recommend that he does this with very low expectations, mind you, but I think emailing or reaching out to the airlines here in Nicaragua and just saying, this is something I'm interested in, I'd really like to know what my possibilities are. I guarantee that the airlines does have the potential to reach out to the government and request that very special case allowance for having someone work there who is not Nicaraguan. There are places that can happen. If you're in that, you're the one or two people potential in the entire country, you're moving to the country for the purpose of filling a role, you can end up getting one of those waivers. We're very hesitant of mentioning this because the moment you do, everyone goes, well, my career must also be a specialty. I'm sure they'd want to give me a waiver. And of course, that's not the case, right? I have never heard of a person who came with looking for a waiver who got one. I have heard of people who were here, were already living in the country, had outrageously unique skill sets, and ended up being found by someone who's like, you're who we need. I can't believe we found you. We're willing to let you work in the country for this purpose. And keep in mind that, of course, if Tim wanted to do this and had lots of money, he could go out, start a business here, get himself to a point by spending lots of money and running a business that he had his own waiver. And then he could go get a pilot's license and go to the airline, or complete his commercial pilot's license, I should say, and then go to the airlines and be like, look, I'm able to work here for a completely unrelated purpose that I've made sure that I'm able to do this, and I'm able to fill this role you might want. What are my chances of getting in, right? That is an option, but probably a weird path to go, but those things do exist, right? When we're talking about people who want to work here in the country and need to get that permission, we're talking about situations where people are not willing, and very few people are able and willing to do this and would be interested in working for someone else. But if you went, we're only talking about people who are not creating themselves the right to work through an investment visa program. So he could do that like anyone can, but when you factor in how much that costs and how much work it takes and how long it takes, it doesn't make a lot of sense unless you have a career that just you really want to do. Maybe being a commercial airline pilot is an example of that, or maybe being a volcanic power production engineer could be an example of that, where you're like, I'm so into this, but I don't want to do it as a hobby, right? That's a different kind of thing. And I would like to make a little bit of money, right? Of course, but it's not the most lucrative path to it. Then saying, well, I'm going to go start a business that may not make any money, but hopefully it doesn't lose too much, and that will get me in the door. Well, that's something you can do. But you can see how weird of a scenario or how niche of a scenario that would be. But if that's something you're willing to do, that does change the government's viewpoint on you working, right? That is, you're able to basically invest past that barrier. So I think for Tim, he should be like, wow, there's really no chance of this, but it is worth reaching out and saying, what if one of these pilots wasn't available? What if you had an extra pilot that was available on call? And then if you ever have someone retire or move on, I could move up into that role, right? There's probably some amount of conversation to be had. And the airlines may say, well, I'm sorry, but we have a backlog of, half a dozen Nicaraguans who have the qualifications, and we just don't have enough positions for them. So you're never going to get in because we have Nicaraguans that are going to fill that. We know we have enough people for any potentiality. There's just no reasonable way. That's something he needs to know, and then he can look at other options or move on or whatever. Or they may say, wow, you know, we really don't get any interest in this, and we really have to bring in every person from abroad. I'm sure they have enough people currently, right, or else they wouldn't be operating, but they may want to have an additional person in the wings. They may have someone nearing retirement, and they haven't gone down the path of starting to look for a replacement yet, or something of that nature. So I think it's worth having the conversation. I wouldn't rule it out in this case, but I would be very, very just, you know, cautious about getting hopes up that it's very likely, because it's just a tiny, tiny pool of people. There's no competition or anything from other airlines. When you put it all together, it's like it's hard to imagine a scenario where they're actually short on pilots and would be looking for that, but you don't know if you don't ask, right? So I do think that is the way to go. It is a pretty interesting place to be looking at airlines. And of course, you may get lucky and talk to the airlines and they say, you know what, the economy's been coming back in Nicaragua, and we've really been toying with the idea of maybe adding flights within the country, right? Like I said, we have an airport here in Leon. There's a new airport going in at North Managua. There are a few extra airports around the country, like the Costa Esmeralda in the south, and Rivas near Tola. And while none of them have flights going to them currently, or passenger flights going to them currently, the airline could be in a position where they're like, you know what, we actually have a spare plane, or we have a line on a plane we're about to acquire or could acquire, and we don't have a pilot for it. And if we had a pilot that we, had, in our pocket, we could pursue getting that plane. Maybe we would add a route or a loop to maybe Esmeralda to Leon. And I'm totally making up ideas here, right? But these are things that would be very reasonable for an airline to say. And they might say, there's, with the slower speed limits, we're finding that people are more interested in flights within the country, and people from Leon sometimes would like to be able to go to the Corn Islands without having to drive to Managua first. So, maybe that makes sense, right? That's reasonable. A long shot for sure, and it would be all about hitting that perfect moment in time. But again, if you don't ask, you won't know. So I think it's a good conversation to have, and maybe it's something they can play around with ideas, because it is a tiny company, but that is pretty much where it is. So I know it's not a great answer, Tim, but it is kind of where we are here. What may be possible, and this I have no idea, right? I'm not super knowledgeable about the airline industries. There are a number of airlines that operate in the region, right? We have Copa out of Panama. We have the Avianca out of El Salvador, and these operate through Managua on a regular basis, as well as the Costa Rican airlines. And of course, it's possible to fly out of Tegucigalpa in Honduras. If you were to talk to the local airlines, or the regional airlines, I should say, not exactly local, that come through here, it is feasible that you may be able to live in Nicaragua and actually work out of those countries, right? So it may be that you're a pilot out of Tegucigalpa, but you're able to spend the majority of your home time in Nicaragua and kind of play with it that way. That may be possible, right? If you think about going on a loop, you could be a Copa pilot, and the plane originates out of Panama, and you're just in that position where you're spending the night in Managua or whatever. I don't know what their schedules are like. I don't know when that actually would work versus when it wouldn't. Maybe it never makes sense, right? It easily doesn't. There's a reason why they hub at those cities, because that's where they have their overnights, right? Because the rest of their flight crew needs to stay there. But you never know if someone has some unique situation that could work, or you could have a schedule where you're on a week, off a week, and your off week you can be at home in Nicaragua, and they can just pick you up as they come through. Airlines can do interesting things because of the way that flights go, and in a small region like Central America, you may find that there's just way more pilots than there are opportunities. But you may also find that there's way more opportunities than there are pilots, and there may be a desperation for pilots in the region. So absolutely, I would reach out to all the regional airlines and see who can potentially make a deal with you, or have some ideas that you could pursue, and that would be the way to go. I wish you the best of luck. It's definitely a difficult one, but I would reach out. There is some hope. I don't want to poo-poo on the possibility, because it could maybe work out. So Good luck with that. Thank you so much for the question. For everyone else, remember to give us a thumbs up. Send in video questions of your own. It is awesome for you guys to connect. Remember, we do live streams on Thursdays, plus ad hoc ones at different times, but Thursdays is our big one, and get on there. It really is a great time to connect with everybody. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. It's like Patreon, comes directly to me, helps pay the bills here. And as always, I will see all of you tomorrow.